Hi everybody, this is Cavenaugh from the class Disability 520. This is assignment 4 on emerging juncture. I'm going to do it on two of the fairy tales that we discussed, Hans my Hedgehog and the Donkey. Okay, two of the fairy tales covered in the readings, Hans my Hedgehog and the Donkey, I believe partially heal disjuncture through their multidimensional portrayal of empathetic characters, in particular given the time period in which the stories were written and the possible intent of the writers involved. The stories offer an alternative, less monstrous and more humane view of the medically disabled. Looking at the atypical in the Middle Ages, while the mentioned fairy tales were officially edited and published in 1812 by the Grimm brothers, they have roots in the pre-Enlightenment period of the Middle Ages, a time dominated by superstition, poverty, fear, and very limited science. It was an age in which the atypical were in large part ascribed to the doings of magic, demons, and persecuted as witches. Assistance and tolerance for the medically disabled, seen as a very distinct, binary, and less fortunate other, were seen as acts of alms and charity for the most part. In Hans my Hedgehog, the first fairy tale I'm going to look at, within this context that I just mentioned about the time period, the story of Hans portrays a child born with the snout and looks of a groundhog. Hans is considered an animal by his parents, is not baptized, and is forced to sleep under the hay because of his quills. And I also believe he can't nurse with his mother because of the quills. His father wishes him dead, and Hans eventually leaves for the woods, where he thrives in a world dominated by animals and music. He eventually helps a lost king and is rewarded by the king with the king's daughter, who assists Hans in his transformation into a human form. Well, the story's powerful final message is you need to wash away disability to find true connection and happiness. There are more subtle messages within the story that contradict prevailing thought of the period. For starters, Hans is very human-like in his industrious and successful nature, ability to play the bagpipes beautifully, and his act of charity for the king. In addition, as depicted by Schmelzing, 2014, while Hans's ability to overcome his form can be seen as the stigmatizing super cripple, it can also be seen as something more. He's not simply an object of pity and alms, but a man capable of action. In the donkey, similar contradictions can be found. In one sense, the donkey is again as a result of a monstrous birth. He's part donkey and part human. Scorned by a queen who wants to throw him into the river to feed the fish. And he cannot find full happiness until he sheds his animal-like form. On the other hand, he is loved as he grows up and grows into a cheerful and happy man and talented musician. In a similar vein to Hans, he's also again befriended by a king who gives him his daughter in marriage. A distinction in the character's depiction could also be made between how the characters treat the donkey in Hans and the feelings of the narrator or the writer's voice. For example, in Hans my Hedgehog, it is the father, mother, and pastor who condemn and stigmatize Hans, not the narrator of the story. As pointed out by Zach Zipis in Schmeising's article, it also is in fact common for narrators of fairy tales to portray monstrous characters as sympathetic. The cruel acts towards Hans and the donkey could also be seen as a literary strategy used to provoke questioning and critique. An example of this is when the donkey is pained by his reflection in the river, creating feelings of empathy from the reader. In a common literary technique, the writers may have depicted the contextual and social values of the time as they believed they were, not as they wished they were, and by so doing offered a social criticism. In specific, through the use of literary realism, hyperbole, and reflection, the writers may have asked readers to see their world anew. More simply, by exaggerating what is commonly accepted behavior, the writers may have been attempting to make the reader more aware of his or her assumptions about disability and disjuncture. This is what artist-photographer Jean Moore called attempting to make the viewer see from the inside, or through the eyes of the disenfranchised, versus only observing externally. Similarly, poet T.S. Eliot meant the same in his comment on the purpose of art. And at the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. In that sense, both stories can be seen as attempting to move readers towards a different view of the disabled, and by so doing, initiate a greater feeling of juncture between the typical and the atypical. But I believe it would be going too far to say that the writers of the stories fully intended this to be the case, especially in light of the endings of each tale and the fact that the tales may have been more unforgiving in their original form. Still, I believe it can be seen as a start, and with the writer's full intent as artists unknown, a possible intent to shift the period perceptions of the atypical.